Recording in progress.
Okay, everyone needs to.
Anybody that has Zoom up on their laptop, if you could mute the computer and also turn off the microphone.
Yep.
But I'm turning on my microphone to call the roll, right?
No, the microphone is the stick microphone in front of you is the one that's going to pick you up. I'm just talking about in the Zoom
Up here.
interface.
But it's red.
Oh, you know what?
So that should be green if you're talking to it.
Thank you.
I'm just saying.
No, hold on, I have to silence, hold on. I think I just did it. Oh, you did it. I just put the volume down.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, I missed it. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I don't hear any more echoes. I think we're ready to go. Do you want to count us in, Dave?
I'm going to count you through the window over here.
Okay.
Guess password. 69 people.
I can. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 6, 2023 Northampton School Committee meeting. This is a hybrid meeting. We are meeting here in the City Council chambers in the municipal building downtown Northampton, and also online on Zoom. I am Mayor Jean Shara. I will be presiding this evening, and all who are participating with us, either in the room or on Zoom, will be audio and video recorded. We are meeting pursuant, in this hybrid fashion, pursuant to former Governor Baker's emergency order modifying the state's open meeting law that was issued in 2020. And so that enables us to be meeting in this hybrid fashion. Annie, will you please call the roll of the school?
Mayor Shara,
Present.
Member Robbins. I see you, but you're muted.
I think she may need to be made a co-host.
Okay, I'm here.
I think I need more people to be made co-hosts. Member Gazy?
Present.
Member Seraphy Cox?
Present.
Member Stein?
Present.
Have you muted and turned your?
Member Levy? Member Miller?
Present.
Member Goldman? Member Agner?
Present.
And Member Davis?
Present.
Okay. I have a quorum. I have many quorums and many echoes. Yeah, Kaya.
Turn your speaker all the way down and also put mute.
I'm not in yet.
Oh.
You also have to put mute, I believe you have to put mute on in the Zoom. Everyone
Zoom.
ready? So at the bottom of your Zoom page, on the very left, mute, make sure you're muted. Just make sure you're muted.
Are you?
I'm muted. I think, maybe it wasn't all the way down.
Now it is. Excellent. Okay, great. So we have a quorum, And the first item on the agenda, this is a special meeting. The first item on the agenda is announcement of the finalists of the superintendent candidates. And I would like to welcome Josh Dixon to come up to the podium, who was the chair of the superintendent search committee, and we're very grateful.
Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can the people on Zoom hear? Can I see some heads? I'm seeing some nodding.
Great. Thank you. On behalf of the Superintendent Search Committee, I'm pleased to announce that we have identified 4 finalist candidates for the next superintendent of the Northampton Public Schools. Over the course of the past few weeks, the Superintendent Search Committee has been working diligently to review applications, conduct initial interviews, and deliberate on the strongest possible candidates to recommend to the full school committee. The screening committee received a total of 11 applications. We were fortunate to receive a diverse pool of candidates, which included individuals from both Massachusetts as well as educators from across the Eastern Seaboard. Of the 11 applicants, the search committee voted unanimously to interview a total of 8 candidates. After conducting the initial interviews, the committee deliberated and chose to move forward a total of 4 candidates, including, in alphabetical order, Dr. Portia Bonner, who's an educational consultant and served as the interim superintendent of schools for the Basra Public School District in Basra, Connecticut, Dr. Jonathan Bruno, Director of Learning and Teaching in the Berkshire Hills Regional School District, Dr. Marissa Mendonça, Deputy Superintendent of the Pittsfield Public Schools, and Dr. Tara Tiller, Chief Operations and Finance Officer of the Cheatham County School District in Ashland City, Tennessee. The search committee is honored to present such a strong, diverse candidate pool to the full Northampton School Committee. It's the recommendation of the search committee that the full committee conduct site visits and/or community forums in each candidate's current/former district to gain a robust understanding of how diverse stakeholders viewed each potential candidate. The search committee would also like to extend a special thanks to both Liz LaFond from MASC as well as Annie Thompson for all of your support as well as your hard work and dedication to the process. We certainly couldn't have done it without you. And a special thanks to MASC also for the snacks and drinks for our late night interviews. And on a more personal note, I would like to thank all 9 members of our search committee for their dedication to this process and for bringing their unique perspective and lens as we searched for our next superintendent. We were charged with a really time-intensive and important task. Each member rose to the challenge and did so with both poise and a sense of humor. I'd also like to thank the search committee members for being willing to share their own experiences within the Northampton Public Schools with potential candidates. It was truly remarkable to see how our small group grew closer together throughout this process, and I couldn't have been happier to be a member of this amazing group. Finally, I'd like to give a special shout out to our 2 student representatives, Zara and Levi. And I also want to say good luck to Levi, who has been accepted to Emerson College. And he was very excited, and I just wanted to take a moment to congratulate him. Thank you so much, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to field to them.
Thank you so much, Josh. And thank you for all the work that you did sharing. And I echo all of your thanks. And thanks to Liz LaFond, who's actually here this evening, and to MASC and to everyone who worked really hard on this committee. I'm really, really grateful, and please extend those thanks. Member Levy.
I just want to echo that gratitude. It is an incredibly challenging task to come to priority, to prioritize.
Your microphone?
Oh, yeah, yep. No, red, yep.
Thank you, sorry. Was just saying thank you. It's an incredibly challenging task, and I am so impressed with this group, with your leadership of the group, and I'm really, really excited to meet these 4 finalists. I have incredible faith that that you found us a really strong group of finalists, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Seraphy Cox.
I'm just wondering if we have a written list of those names, or if you could say them again.
Sure, absolutely. So I do have them written, and I planned to send the same message, except I recognized I still have a typo, so I'll fix that, to NPS all and to the full school committee, but I am happy to repeat the names also. Dr. Portia Bonner, Dr. Jonathan Bruno, Dr. Marissa Mendonça, and Dr. Tara Tiller. And I can post them on the website too.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Agna.
While we're doing thank yous, I'd like to also thank Member Levy for helping us by giving us a training in, okay, thank you, inclusive practices in hiring. It really set the stage for us in our deliberations and in our way of going about working together. I think we often referred to you, Member Levy, as having said this or that, and so that was really, really important in the process. So thank you so much.
I echo that. Thank you for your graciousness in doing that and for the time that you gave to it. Okay. Do you, yeah, is your hand up?
Oh, I had one other question, which is, I know we do have a set of listening sessions and focus groups set up, and I just wanted to notify, it's not really a question, but maybe it's a question, wanted to notify the public that those dates are on the web, and I guess my question is that updated, or all of those dates
So
accurate?
that is a great question. So Liz was actually working with Michelle today to update that list because some of them were during our interview week. And so my understanding, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but that will be updated on the website and shared at large with the community in a variety of formats shortly.
Hopefully tomorrow.
Hopefully tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Robbins.
Thank you for all this work, and I look forward to getting the background materials, which I think should be comprehensive. Can we have a date when the school committee might receive those?
We get to stand together.
Great.
The school committee may select any date, and I'd be happy to forward on the complete application packets.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Any date that the school committee
No, it's green.
selects, I would be more than happy to send you out the complete application.
Oh, hold
Can't hear
on.
me?
So, no, who's our non-person?
Dave.
Dave,
You go there, Dave? Can you see us?
just because,
I need to be unmuted somehow.
So can you guys hear us? Because I can't hear you.
Can
We're
you
on
hear me
Zoom.
now?
hold on one sec. Annie, can you just unmute?
I don't know why that became muted, sorry.
I don't know why. Oh.
Is it under NOM, Dave?
It's Gov, I'm not sure.
Gov Zoom, got it, okay.
Did you get him?
I'm asking him to unmute.
Okay, now try this.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. You guys disappeared for a while.
So I'm ready to share the complete application packets anytime the school committee says to do so. The only thing I would remind you all about is that only the resumes are considered public record. The rest of the application packet is considered confidential personnel records. So please do not share anything beyond the resume, if you're so inclined to share it all.
Yeah, Member Levy.
I wonder if we want to do some work, we haven't yet created our rubric. I wonder if we want to do some of that work before seeing the candidate materials. I'm not suggesting necessarily that we do, I'm just posing it as a question.
Do we have a schedule or do we have a date to do that work? You can leave that green, by the way. Like, you can leave it on, unlike the other
Oh.
system. You don't have to turn it on.
Well, you looked at me because, oops, the host is not allowed, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to unmute. Can you hear me? Okay. I think it is important that we do something before we reveal the records, because we learned that in the process that we went through. And that is possibly the best thing we could do. And we also have tentatively, we still have the 15th of March reserved as a time to come together for the rubric. And I don't know if that's something that the whole committee has to do by committee, or whether we can ask for volunteers to do it. But I think the focus group data is not going to be complete by the 15th of March. Is that correct?
So my last two focus groups are scheduled for the 18th. So I'll be doing it Saturday evening and Sunday to be sure that you have it.
And when are our interviews scheduled to start?
The week of the 20th, you've set aside. I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about this, whether you want to do one candidate per evening. So the sort of standard setup is that a candidate would come here on the date of their interview, spend the day in the district talking to a whole host of folks that they've pre-identified, and that's been arranged here through the district to best meet the scheduling needs of folks in the district. Then often there's maybe an hour or so meet and greet close to where the interviews will be held, so that members of the public can just come in and say hello, ask questions, and then the candidate maybe take 30 minutes or so, get their game face on, and come on in for the interview. Full day, typical day in the life of a superintendent. I've seen it done with 2 people be interviewed in one day, and sort of the schedule of the visit in the district is sort of they stay opposite of one another. I know, don't roll your eyes, Annie, that takes a little juggling. But it can be done. It can be done. I've also seen school committees who are really, really brave, and they do the site visits on different days, and then they do all 3 or 4 interviews. 4 would be way too many, in my personal opinion, in one day, but I've seen as many as 3 done in one day. I do not recommend it. It's an awful lot.
And how much time commitment, for the school committee members?
In terms of what?
Be available on those days?
Oh, well, generally speaking, so there might be a smaller subset that takes a candidate out to lunch each day, or meets in a school for lunch with the candidate, or agrees to be at the meet and greet. That really is all up to you to decide.
Okay. And then a public meeting at the end?
Yes, it's all done in public from here. So I would assume 4 candidates, 4 evenings, or the other option would be doing 2 candidate visits to the district in one day and interviewing 2 candidates in the evening. 2 is doable. You're going to give them approximately, I would say 75 minutes, unless you want to go to the full hour and a half. Depends on sort of how many and the kinds of questions you all develop, which you all will do. Similar to the search committee, I'll provide you with a compilation of questions that can be used, pick from the questions as they are, just use them as food for thought, create your own questions, combine questions, just to make, find what you really want to get at the heart of asking your candidates. There's a lot of questions in that question set.
And then what we found helpful was that we presented the questions to the entire group, and then that way we weren't sort of wordsmithing, but we did edit them before taking a vote to finally approve them, and that was a much simpler process than I think if we went through picking all the questions. So everybody went through Liz, sharing sort of the top questions, and then Gwen and I put together a draft, and that was really helpful. I would say it still took us about 30 minutes probably to go through and change some of them.
But creating questions as a group will take significantly longer than 30 minutes. I can guarantee that. So what the questions ultimately are public documents, right? So what we did in this process and what has been acceptable is if members agree, they can go through and select their top 2 or 3. Some people select 7, 8, or 14. Send them to me. I simply compile them by category and send them out to, in the case of the search committee, it was the chair and vice chair. Could be the vice chair here, chair, vice chair, whatever, or Or if the committee decides and you have a lot of time, we can sit together and group wordsmith. It can be somewhat of a painful process, I'm going to be honest. I've done it both ways.
Okay, we've got some questions. We'll see if anyone has some thoughts. Member Seraphy Cox.
So I heard, I'm thinking logistically, I heard you say that interviews are the week of March 20th and that we could either do 2 candidates in one day or 1 candidate per day, which would mean we would need 4 different days.
Mm-hmm.
Are you envisioning that they would all happen that week? Or if we do 1 candidate per day, is that over the course of 2 weeks? Like how does that go?
We're going to work with your schedule on that. I mean, ideally, in my life, well, ideally, it doesn't really matter. The only night I ever seem to almost have off is Friday, so.
We do have a school committee meeting on the 23rd.
Okay, so you have a school committee meeting on the 23rd. Now, for example, if you decided to interview on the 21st or the 21st, 22nd, whatever combination of those days, and as part of your regular meeting, you could deliberate and decide then, or you could deliberate and decide after your final interview. These are all things that you have to decide on in terms of what works best for this committee.
Okay. Member Seraphy Cox, did you have another? No.
Yeah, the follow-up question then is in terms of agenda, like, is that something that you're expecting for us to decide tonight, or when do we make those decisions?
Yeah, no, you don't have to decide tonight. In fact, I can sum all this up in an email so that everybody has it, and the next time you come together, you can make that decision. My impression of tonight was just so that you could hear who the finalists are, because you have a lot of work to do with the budget tonight.
Okay. Member Stein.
Yeah, I think given the tight turnaround, I would be in favor of getting the materials sooner. I wouldn't want to wait and not have enough time to work through everything and think about it. So my preference would be to get them as soon as possible, the application materials. As far as 2 nights or 4 nights, I just think whatever we do, we need to leave ourselves with enough time. I think we're going to have a lot of questions. And I also wouldn't want to book any deliberation after either the 2nd night or the 4th night to occur on that same night. And I'd want to, as Liz was just suggesting, having it on a subsequent meeting. So that would be my preference.
Okay. Let's see, Member Robbins, and then Member Miller. Member Robbins.
Thank you. Just quickly, I agree about, I'd love to have some space after the last interview to not only be able to give some thought to decision-making, but to hear from constituents, which I think is a common practice in other districts. It's a big decision and it's good to get input. So delaying that actual decision past the last interview would be helpful. I'm also curious about visiting the candidates' home districts. Do we have a process for that or a protocol in terms of what we want to know and who are going to be asking? Is that something you've done with the search committee?
Oh, no, we have not done that with the search committee. That's something that the school committee will also decide. Again, I'm sorry, I would have come more prepared, but I thought we were just announcing finalists tonight. I'd like to sum it all up in a document for you. You should visit candidate districts. You should, again, 2 good ways to do it is either you break up in 4 separate teams of 2 or 3, or you create 1 team of 2 or 3. I know I heard a thought about having one of the representatives from the search committee, a student, perhaps be part of the visits. The students were absolutely wonderful to have as part of that group. They were so thoughtful and so quick with their questions and responses. You can visit candidates' districts either that same week you're doing interviews, that's a lot on you as school committee members, or you could visit the week before. Again, if you break up in 4 teams, then that's done pretty quickly. If it's one team visiting all the districts, that's a lot on a few people. You do have one candidate in Tennessee. I'm only going to suggest this because I know how well you all work virtually, but during COVID, everything was done virtually. And a lot of people appreciated the virtual site visits because it saved the drive time or the travel time. And to be blunt, you're going to see the people that the candidate wants you to see in the district. The only thing that doesn't allow for is sort of those impromptu, maybe you see some folks in the hallway and you stop and ask a question. So that's just something to think about. I can turn around a memo and get it out to everybody pretty quickly. I'll have it go out through Annie because she knows the protocol. Right, Annie? She lives for it.
I've been living with it. Thanks, Liz. Member Miller. Don't unmute.
I just don't unmute. Got it. Just use the microphone.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I thought that in our process, it's helpful, at least we on the search committee found it very helpful to hear Member Levy's presentation before we did anything. And I think that that's something we have to figure in addition to getting all the materials, which I agree should be as soon as possible because, of course, only Member Agna and I have seen them because we're on the search committee, so you all need to see them as soon as possible. And then I think we need to figure out a time for Member Levy to present to all of us about the search. And then I think we can break it down into, and I'm hoping for my own schedule that it will be evenings that we can figure out, that we, to do all the next steps.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments, anything else we want to try and figure out this evening? It seems like there's a lot of things we're going to try and jam into a small amount of time. Member Levy?
Is this on our agenda to discuss Thursday?
It is on the agenda to discuss. You're going to present it. So I guess we'll figure out the schedule and we'll have that to discuss, or I can add something else to the agenda.
So what might be helpful is for you to switch me presenting to Liz presenting.
Okay.
Because technically, although I'm happy to present, I just don't know that I have anything else to present other than the finalists.
Okay.
But
You
if,
okay with that? Joining us on Thursday night?
Of course. Yes, I just have to check my newly revised public community forum schedule. But I think that I'm available in the evening.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for your flexibility.
of course.
So are you able before Thursday to send us the email with all the details, and then on Thursday we can discuss and?
I should, yes. I absolutely should do that. And I will say, if I may, Mayor, the presentation by Dina on sort of checking your bias or anti-bias in hiring practices was a great experience for us to have as a group. And we did reflect back on it several times. And in my communication to you, you'll see, and I'll include it because we talked about it several times with the search committee. I always talk about it with committees I deal with. You will hear feedback from the community. It doesn't matter the community or the candidate. There's always someone, sort of if you've reached this point in your career, you've had the occasion to have someone, a student perhaps, that you've had to deal with in some dismissal capacity as a principal or a teacher, perhaps an employee who there was a situation perhaps with an improvement plan, or it could be a million things. And some people really never forget those things, right? You'll hear from people like that. It's inevitable. So I just, in terms of your presentation around anti-bias, you do have ways to check on things, and I would absolutely encourage you to do that instead of just automatically writing down everything you hear and taking it to be the absolute hard truth. Okay?
Thank you for that perspective. Okay, anything else you want to add, Josh, or? Thank you. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
And again, thank you to the search committee, and thank you to everyone who applied and wanted to come and work with us. We're very grateful. Okay, that brings us to our next, I just lost my agenda when that happened. The next item, which is the presentation from Dr. Pearson Campbell on the first view of the budget. So I will hand it over to you, Dr. Pearson Campbell. Hello.
Hello, Bobby. Are you on there, Bobby?
I've seen Bobby.
I saw it.
I'm here. Okay, let's begin. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. Tonight, Bobby and I, our building principals and directors are on today. We're going to talk about the fiscal year 2024 operating budget for Northampton Public Schools. And this is the table of contents. It's interactive. And so it can be used throughout the presentation at home for people who are 21st century. As we go on, I want to thank all our members, our building principals, our directors, our central office staff for analyzing and looking at the budget. They've been very thoughtful this year. So our first part is the strategy in Northampton Public Schools is based on several factors. While enrollment in NPS is holding steady, we haven't seen the growth in enrollment as projected by previous estimates. State and federal funding for pre-K education has not kept pace with inflation. As of February 7, 2023, the inflation rate is 6.45 compared to the long-term value of 3.27. Funding for special education services from Massachusetts Department of Education, our out-of-district placement, increased by 14%. Our student needs have exacerbated since returning from the pandemic. Overall, the Northampton Public School District, the school committee, the school administrators, and school employees have shared a commitment to these goals. Provide our educators, staff, and administrators with salaries to attract and maintain a qualified, diverse staff. Ensure each building has a robust continuous services and interventions to make sure all learners are supported and grow academically, socio-emotionally, and behaviorally. Administer regular screening and progress monitoring to provide the appropriate interventions and support for students, therefore improving student outcomes as expected. Consistently providing high-quality, evidence-based, rigorous curriculum materials that empower all students to become active, engaged, independent learners who give back to the communities. Continue robust programming in the arts, physical education, career pathways, humanities, and STEM. Establish classroom and school communities that are safe and engaging and to provide all students a sense of belonging. These are the considerations for this budget. We as a district will need to forecast the next 5 years or more to support the Northampton Public School. As the funds end in 2024, the revenue of Northampton City can be variable, enrollment numbers are holding steady, the cost of services are increasing over time, examining our education facilities, 21st century learning, and stabilization of our educators and supporting our students. Now, we looked at enrollment from 2014 to 2023. In 2014, we had 2,746. And FY23, we had 2,573 with FTEs of 241. We know we went through WINS model in FY17 and FY18. That's make more inclusive opportunities in Northampton Public Schools. In addition, as we moved on, we went through the pandemic, where we realized that a lot of our students came back with some strong mental health and also closing the achievement gap. As we go on, we want to know, what is the FY24 proposed superintendent budget? So this is yours, Bobby.
Okay, so this screen here just shows you how we broke it down by cost center. The district central office includes quite a bit. Then each school has their own number: the Bridge Street, Jackson Street, Leeds, Ryan Road, JFK. You'll see the comparison fiscal 24 to 23, a brief description of what changed in those increases, and then the school choice amount that's paid per each school, typically for paraprofessional salaries. There are a few other items in there. If you go to the next slide, that continues on. The last four, the facilities, student services, technology, transportation, those are all broken out from the district budget. So in other words, each of the elementary schools may have some of these costs embedded in their cost center. These breakouts here are only for district services, and the district services are split amongst schools depending on need. So we have a total budget of $37,770, and last year was $35,159. And then our school choice budget of $2,719. This is just our chapter 70, which shows you that that there's kind of a fundamental problem here. Chapter 70 really should be revisited, and they should change their formulas. And I know people are working on that. But this just shows you the enrollments. We had an overall enrollment change of 8. Our foundation budget went up 5.62. The required district contribution went up 5.4. And our chapter 70 aid went up 1.3, which is an increase of only $80,040, which is $30 per student. $30, which I'm anticipating and hoping may go up to $60. That's what it had shown, but in the preliminary governor's budget, it's only at $30. And then the required net school spending that we have to spend, we have a 4.41% increase. So again, I'm just to show the 4.41 as compared to the 1.03. To me, that's an issue. Then we have our level service is $37,772.06, which basically means that we're providing the same services that we have in FY23, plus any increases that we are obligated to, such as busing contract services, any other contract services that might have increased. And then you have your FY23, which is $35,159, the increase of $2,610,000 or 7.43%. So if you look at the $37,770 and the 4% that the city gave us, that is $36,565. That leaves us with a deficit of $1,204,459, which we've worked hard to come up with cuts for that with the entire alt team, and that will be shown further down. This is just showing, this slide here just shows you what's going to happen if we don't absorb some of these cuts. If we keep going in this fashion, saying that we're going to have a 4% increase each year, which is probably going to, in actuality, probably be more than a 4%, and the city could afford to give us a 4% increase. If we don't absorb the deficits, the $1,204,000 for 24, $1,252,000, and so on, it's just going to grow. That deficit's going to grow. So at some point, we need to make some cuts in order to keep up with the times. or get the state to fund us the way they should.
So the next section is recommendations to balance the budget. So each building principal and the ALT team provided recommendations and also the impact. So we have to remember that the impact is when we do the reductions, how it affects each school in this district. The Budget Reduction Committee met with building principals, Northampton Association school employees, and department administrators for the reduction recommendations in their buildings while meeting the legal obligations of our contract obligations. Each building principal and building administrator provided an impact statement of how the budget reductions will have an impact on student learning to the committee. The superintendent and the business manager examined the recommendations to support the balance the budget of the schools. So each on the right-hand side is really more item analysis of saying for each school, this is what they asked to reduce. And on the left-hand side is the presentation of how they were reduced. So Bridge Street was asked to reduce 92,775. Jackson Street was asked this year 100,506. Leeds Elementary School 95,757. Arcade Finn Ryan Road 82,282. JFK presentation is 193,943. NHS is 233,483. And special ed provided their background. And district-wide presentation is 405,713. Approximately 1,204,000 when we finalize that. As we go for each school, there's a link for each school that tells you the impact and what will be done. This is just a suggestion to the school committee because the school committee ultimately makes the decision of how to fund the schools and also what would need to be reduced. So this is part of a recommendation for you. We also want to make sure that you understand that with the reduction, class sizes can change for each school. So at Bridge Street, it will increase the class sizes for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. And if we have someone move in, it might change. So the impact of reducing the Bridge Street is a paraeducator retiring, not filling the position, school psychologist retiring, savings due to pay difference, cutting the third grade teacher. We know that ESSA funds does not affect the budget and preschool BCBA. The alternative scenario number 2, paraeducators retiring, not filling the position, school psychologist savings due to pay difference, and music teacher retiring, or we do not fill a vacant sped teacher. So we have to figure out what will happen as we move forward. But this is the suggestion to the school committee. As we go on, the process continues again at Jackson Elementary School. So last year, they were asked to reduce the tier specialist. And also too, this year, they're asked to reduce 100,000. Jackson Street has currently 3 second grade classes, each with 16 to 17 students. For FY24, she will combine 3 classes into 3 grade classes, each with 25 students due to planned retirements. And this will be the impact for the class sizes for 23 to 24. As we move forward, we know that the impact of reduction of force for JSS, small class sizes, and excellent educators are 2 most important things we can provide the students. But when we have to increase the size for the classroom, then that will have an impact on students' learning. So that's the impact for Leeds Elementary School. As we go down to Ryan Road, they were asked to reduce 82,282. So they're looking at the tech integration specialist, looking at the savings for that. BCBA moved to 0.5. Lunch and recess monitoring, grade 1 paraeducator. So with the impact of this will lead to reduction of building-wide behavior support. Building administrators and tier support specialists will pick up lunch and recess coverage, reduce support for grade 1 students, and inability to support grade 1 ELA and math sentence group, and reduce differentiation for all students. So for that's Ryan Road. And we keep on going down to JFK presentation. So as we go down to JFK, their presentation talks about the reduction. So they'll be taking off enriching students, kickboard, 2 retirees, PD conferences, 6th grade, sped teacher, tech integrationists. We know from that, we'll look at the school class sizes. From that, so we'll have Supernova will have 4 teams. Northern Lights will have 5. So fifth grade and sixth grade will have 4 and 5. Like we keep on saying, there will be an impact. Cutting a sixth grade special education teacher. Sixth grade will need to stay at 2 teams rather than 3, as requested by sixth grade staff. Less individual attention for our students with the highest academic and behavioral needs. The sixth grade team will be unable to return to 3-team model, which lends itself to more community building and students feeling of a belonging and ease to transition to middle school. The technology integrations will only be able to work 0.5. Teachers will have less support with assistive technology. Cutting the 504 coordinator, our guidance team, our ETL, and our administrative team will have to restructure their schedules in order to coordinate 504 meetings. So that's JFK. We keep going down to NHS, is the high school. And so each building principal created a time of the impact statement. So we're looking at class sizes and the enrollment. And so the enrollment right now, we have school choice and estimate choice would be 85, enrollment would be 871. And right now, the estimate above assumes 28 students who choose Smith Folk, or 16 students enter from local charter, and 10th through 12th grade enrollments assumes current students stay at NHS. As you move, as we always say, the impact of reducing professional staffing includes increasing class sizes, reducing the range of course offering, decreased support to interventions. So if our budget is not fully funded to the 7.43%, it will have an impact. As we move on to district-wide presentation,
Can you do the special education?
Yeah, hold on 1 second. I just want to go back 1 second. This is Josh's presentation over, he redesigned special ed. So he provided what the change in that department. So I can maybe go to the very end because I know he had a presentation. Just want to show you here. He's going to change the department structure. So this is the first part. So the reduction to 1 FTE associate director to a 0.5 FTE preschool, and the department additions to make into a full-time coordinator at Bridge Street in Jackson, and 1 at Ryan and Reeds. And the reason why he wants to bring more services down to the schools so they have more one-on-one time, and also to making sure there's a consistent model looking for identification for students. I know Josh is on here, so we could add it then at the end for that. He did provide us with the impact of it. It's decentralized special education administration support, providing increased building-based support resources, allows our faculty to increase their time with children, provide consistency in regards to eligibility determination, improve the quality and consistency of our IEPs, provide a single point of contact of parents, families when issues arise with services and support. Because I do know that our district is being reviewed from the Department of Education and looking at our students who have been identified as ELL and special ed. So we really want to drill down to see how we can make that impact. Now I'm going to go back to district-wide presentation. So here's the next step. We're looking at the same piece. We're looking at, this was the ALT team, looking at, so we reduced the limited impact on the classroom. We looked at tech software and hardware, PD supplies, special ed restructuring, nursing, 0.5 math coach, and clock rental. That's going to be adding to our district. In addition, 1 custodian floater will be reduced, a summer school reduction, moving secretaries to a 10-month of JFK to NSS, the 0.5 integrator, retirement, and modifying the director of technology and random small cuts. So we still, once we look at overall for the budget, we're going to look at how they impact overall. As we move on to the next slide, we're trying to reduce the amount of positions, and we're providing with the school committee with some support so they can review what's going on in our building. As we move forward, we want to talk about the impact. So for all schools, the district-wide, services to schools, students, caregivers, and community will be impacted by the following. Our enrollment across the districts has declined, although services for our students have increased based upon the needs following the pandemic. We reduced the support to elementary and middle school related to the implementation of new math and language curriculum, reduced funds for curriculum development in math, language arts, social studies, and science, will impact the timeline for alignment of instructional priorities, reduce the support for schools supporting students with mental health, reduce the number of trainings for our educators and staff in the building, reduce materials and supplies impacting the ability to support schools with unanticipated special education programming needs. Continued, reduce consultation and support for education teachers will help them assessments, planning, diversifying and adapting instruction and behavior management, reduce the opportunity to increase technology enhancements such as a new website to support community involvement. The special education out-of-district placement services have increased by 14%, therefore causing the district to reallocate funding. We keep on going. Education impact for the reduction. The reduction of paraprofessionals will affect the number of supports in the classroom, helping the most needy of students. The key instructional professional development is sent to contractors versus in-district providers. The restructures of leadership and supervision duties of the remaining administrators. The elementary side class sizes will increase depending on the enrollment of the specific grade, and the number of class offerings will be reduced in Northampton High School and JFK. And the implementation of technology improvements and implementations will be at a slower pace. So we're going to add in school choice in Northampton Public Schools. Bobby, this is your section.
Okay, so this is just showing the school choice enrollment, or not in school choice, but the enrollment for all the schools over the past few years. And I can't see in there. This just shows that we get $5,000 per student for school choice. If they attend a half-day kindergarten, it's reduced to $2,500. Any students that are eligible for special ed get an additional increment, and it's determined using a cost calculator similar to the one used for the circuit breaker program, but the special education costs are reimbursed. School choice students are not eligible to receive transportations unless it's specifically written into the IEP. And again, that would be a reimbursable cost. This shows an updated, I'm trying to figure out, I can't quite see my full screen. This way. There we go. Okay. This shows an updated school choice as that was shown. Susan Wright had done one just before I had left, or just before I came, I should say. So this shows that we would have had, according to Susan's thing, $1,000,001 in a deficit at the end of FY24. If we kept on the same projections, so we had to absorb some of those costs, which we did within each of the budgets. And we get down to, at the end of FY24, we'll be down to a deficit of about 257. You know, with that said, you know, hopefully we can put some monies back towards that. But it should hopefully be less that we have to absorb in 25. But still, we will have to absorb some because this doesn't take into consideration raises and all that stuff. So it's something that we need to work on, I think, to build that balance back up. So if you looked at the beginning year balances from year to year, so FY16 was $2,701,000, and that was okay. You carried it over all the way to FY19, which is where we started to overspend. If you look at the revenue line, 1,253,307, and we spent 1,493,000. So we're overspending what we're taking in, which is what cuts away from our balance. And that continued on in 21, 22, 23, and 24. So hopefully we'll start to reduce that and get back to where we can build a positive balance. So just showing that this has been shown in the past that, you know, we were going to hit a fiscal cliff in '24, where we need to incorporate that $1.1 million that I was talking about, in order to come close to a positive balance at the end of '24. In part, I did this by adding the parent indicators to the budget in the amount of $615,288 rather than using school choice, and hopefully plan to put dollars back into school choice budget with any remaining funds from this year's budget with school committee approval.
So the next section, review the start time impact. I know we haven't really talked about it in the budget. We're looking for the survey information, but we wanted to present it here. So next year we want to offer, at the high school, we want to offer 7 classes through dual enrollment. In order to do so, we need to schedule the professors for specific periods, time slots. So they need to be able to look at, by the end of March, about the school start times. Last year, the effective our schedule related to after-school sports. Last year, the budget was $40,000 over budget, and we're waiting on the final numbers. That's for transportation at the end of the athletic season. There's also was an impact on the increased number of tardies and the impact of student athletes being dismissed early from classes and school provided times. So I know we'll probably have another conversation during our budget times, but we just wanted to provide that to the school committee because of the school start times will affect our transportation budget. As we move forward, Tammy Lieber provided her budget for transportation, and they're waiting to hear about the contract for next year. So, Barbara, do you want to go over this slide too?
Yep, so basically, this is just her entire budget, transportation supervisor, which is Tammy, and then the bus drivers. So these are all just contractual increases, bus monitors, substitute drivers. We decreased the substitute drivers a little bit in the staff overtime, and we put that into another line, which you'll see on the next slide. Contract services stayed the same, office supplies stayed the same, other charges and expenses we reduced, bus supplies we reduced, bus fuel stayed the same. The mechanic is where we increased some time because, you know, if you have an aging fleet, obviously you're going to need more work. And then the bus repair supplies, we increased a little bit. So overall, it was increased only by things that we decreased in the previous slide. Crossing guards just have their increase as per the allowed increases. And then on this first line, the regular ed transportation contract, it says we added 8%. I added 10%. We're going out to bid. Tammy is working on finalizing that, and I'm meeting with her on Thursday. So we're going to get that out and hopes to get it back soon. And hopefully it will come in at less than that 10%, which would be a little bit of a savings. And then everything else here other than contractual, the special ed transportation, we did just the 3% increase because we're already in a contract with them. And then homeless and foster care stayed the same. We do get some reimbursement for the homeless transportation, so that's a bonus, but that's depending on the appropriations that they have.
So the next section comes from the contributions from the city budget. So our budget, the educational spending is 43.74%, or $48,332,358. So when we think about the spending on education is 13 million plus the 35 gives it close to a 48,332,358, because people always ask what are the city contributions, and this is what their contributions to our school district. As we go on, in addition to educational spending that's not in the budget, it's 11 million. Last year was 11,779,000. This year is 13,125,785. So it talks about the Medicare contributions, the health insurance, the retirement, capital planning. It's just 625. School choice tuitions for residents who send the students to another district, net charter schools. So that's part of what Northampton City provides to us, provides to the citizens of Northampton. As we go on, it's acquired net spending versus actual versus required, you see that the city is provided more than what is actual. If you look over time, they have increased to the spending above required by this year for FY22 was $10,932,133. And so I know a lot of times people ask what the city is doing, so at least I want to provide that for there. Bobby, do you have any information?
No, just that the net school spending is the floor. So, you know, we're lucky that we are supported more than the floor. But again, this comes down to, in my opinion, a structural problem with what the state provides for public education.
Educational spending has increased over time for the Northampton appropriation, but we also know that our costs are pretty much connected to this, and so we're looking at over time for that. As we move forward, the capital projects for FY23 provided various things for our school district. So last year was $1,020,000, of which $661,000 was funded by grants, and so those are the capital projects that were provided. In addition, for FY24, we're waiting on the approval, so you can see the various capital projects that the city has provided for our school district. And next year beyond, so continue to collaborate with the Northampton Public School District, the school committee, the school administrators, school employees, and caregivers. Continue to examine our facilities to ensure that we are ready for 21st century learning. As a district, examine the creation of the stabilization fund for our special education department. The district commitment to communicating with the school community through the budget process to stay transparent. And so that is our process. Thank you very much. These are also cost centers. I know Bobby's updating the cost centers as we go. So this is pretty much in our budget profiles for electronics for the families and communities to see the profiles for each school. So we'd like to thank you, students, staff, caregivers, and community members, providing us insight on this budget process. So
if you do go back to the cost center slide, just so you know, those are links to that you can click on, and it will show you that by cost center.
Okay, so these are the cost centers. So each school has a link for, like, Bridge Street has their cost center.
And if you want to look at it in the appropriate way, if you hit print, you know, click on your print thing, and then you can rotate it from there. You don't have to print it, but you can rotate it from there. So,
great, there you go. All right.
And then you can rotate if you, so. We'll try to fix that.
All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation, both of you. I also have some additional information that, and some updates since the presentation I gave at the joint meeting on January 31st that I would like to share with the committee and the community. First of all, the capital projects that were just on a few slides ago, those include the Central Services Northampton Public School projects. They don't include the ITS Northampton Public School capital improvements, both from FY23 and that are recommended for FY24. The ITS projects for NPS are funded in 23 and 24 from an unrestricted $500,000 gift from Smith College that was given to the city in December of 2021. To be used over, it was allocated and to be used over 3 years at the mayor's discretion, which could be directed for any use in the city. And I have decided to direct it to for the current fiscal year and for the next fiscal year to technology needs in Northampton Public School classrooms. So I just wanted to draw people's attention to that. And additionally, there's a couple other ITS capital projects that were not included in those slides. So for those who don't know or want to understand more about the capital improvement program, and I thank Member Davis who sat on the committee this year, it's an annually renewing 5-year program. We project 5 years forward and then annually reassess the program. So the current 5-year plan calls for $16 million in capital projects to be able to maintain our schools and to move to align them with the Sustainable Northampton Plan. So for Northampton Public Schools, in the current, or in the capital improvement plan that is being presented right now to the City Council, in that 5-year plan, there's $16 million of capital projects for Northampton Public Schools. Additionally, something that appears in the FY24 SIP, as we call it, that I've already allocated and that the City Council has already approved, so it appears in the program which the Council will be voting on, but this is actually already spending that's been approved, are $500,000 in ARPA funds for the Northampton High School safety improvements, the traffic improvements at the Northampton High School. So there will be significantly more funding needed for the next stages of that project, estimating at least $3 million. It needs final engineering to have the total for that, but that's in addition to the $16 million I was just talking about for the next 5 years in capital improvements. That's another $3.5 million that will be allocated. So I have some news about the cherry sheet and health insurance. So these were some, if you remember from the presentation, these were two of the really sort of big unknowns. Let me see if I can share this screen. Hold on one sec. I've got like multiple things open, so let me. All right, you all can see that? Yes? Okay, so this first slide, in the presentation on January 31st, as I said, there were some unknowns. We have now, so this is what you saw for that presentation. We've now seen the cherry sheet and have the health insurance premium increases. So this next slide, this is with the cherry sheet information incorporated. The cherry sheet is disappointing to say the least. I'm not sure I can possibly express how sort of disheartening it is. So as you'll see from this slide, we have an overall decrease in state aid of $84,422. So to kind of put maybe a finer point, if they don't mind, on the net school spending conversation that Dr. Pearson Campbell and Bobby were having in their presentation, required net school spending increased significantly, but Chapter 70 increased by only a small amount. So if you'll remember last year, it felt sort of astounding that net school spending, which again is determined by a formula by the state, went up from FY22 to 23 by $1,489,704, while Chapter 70 aid, also determined by state formula, only increased by $159,560. That was sort of like shocking. So this year, for FY24, net school spending is increased by $1,518,086, while Chapter 70 increased by $80,040. So that is a larger increase than last year, but half as much of an increase in Chapter 70. So that it was not a welcome thing to see in the cherry sheet. Moving on to health insurance, that sort of big unknown that was out there. We now know that the health insurance increase is higher than the 6% that it was increased last year in FY23. It is 7.97%, so basically an 8% increase, which is a little bit over $1 million increase to health insurance that we need to absorb this year. So you'll see that here. So it's now $13,594,830 is what the health insurance costs are for the city, including the schools. So also not particularly welcome news. So then when we go and look at our projected expenditures, this is what we had seen on the 31st. So you'll recall that before we had these unknowns, after the 2.5% tax increase, which is the maximum we can increase tax revenue plus any new growth. Then subtracting the 4% increase for education that we have allocated off the top to the schools before any other expenditure, we had $1,753,991 for the entire rest of the city to allocate. So when we now add in what we do know, so those two big unknowns that we now know, that leaves us with $407,636 remaining for the 24 other city department budgets, that have the same pressures of inflation and increased energy costs, as well as personnel increases based on the most recently negotiated contracts. So every contract was negotiated this year. We have not settled all contracts. And we've not yet been able to fully build in all the department budgets, so we don't know where this is going to settle out exactly. But with these outstanding unknowns that I just mentioned and the remaining contracts yet to be incorporated, we estimate that we already need to use $341,000 of the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund because we have a deficit with what we now know at this point. So it pains me to update you all on those, but that is what we have learned in this last month. So I'm going to stop sharing this so we can see each other. And that's the information that I have. I wish I had better news. Member Stein. I can't hear you.
Hopefully now?
Yes.
Okay. I was trying to say thank you for the update on the actuals that have come in. I have a few things I want to say. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. The first is sort of, I've struggled trying to understand what percent of the city's money goes to education, in understanding really how it compares to those other districts that we use for all the other metrics in the presentation. And it's just really hard because the way in which we group things together versus they group things together are different. Some folks don't have regional schools involved. Like it's just really difficult. But what I was noticing when I was looking at the numbers tonight was the way in which we talk about cities' contributions, but they also include state aid, right? And they also include state aid, which can only go towards one thing, right? So when you talk about the Chapter 70 money, that's not $8 million the city could spend on something else. That has to go to the schools. And if you look at sort of the tax receipts, right, really our revenue that comes in the tax receipts is the majority of our city revenue. That's like, I don't know, 72 million or so. And there's 26 million going out to the schools, to MPS at least in that. It doesn't count the Voc school and it doesn't count benefits. But I just feel like there's a lot of ways to look at these percentages. And I have no idea when I look at other districts where we stack up, because everyone looks at this stuff a little differently. So I find it hard to know if we are overfunding, if we're underfunded. Like, I just don't know. So I have a struggle with that. I'm interested to hear what other people think. The other thing I really want to mention is, well, two things. The first is still related to the overall budget, which is that through the presentation, I hope everyone can see that there are large increases that we have no control over, like cost of insurance, cost of fuel, cost of all these contracts, where we're at the whim of other providers. And as a result, the only thing we can control are direct employee costs for the most part, which is primarily why you see those cuts, which is a frustrating structural aspect of the budget. So I just wanted to point that out. The second thing I want to point out is that really when I started to look at this and understand the fiscal cliff, and I'm still waiting for some data around it, it seems largely driven by the fact that over the last 8 to 9 years, we've added 35 full-time positions. And I don't know that we've adequately funded them over that time, right? And it also appears that we've added back in paras that were eliminated as part of the first wave of extensions and tied those directly to school choice. I'm still waiting to get the actual numbers here, but if that's the case, essentially the cliff that we created for ourselves was building a workforce that we didn't have the allocation for and balancing the books by drawing down on a revolving account, right, of school choice money, and now we're underwater, right? So I think we need to think a lot more about that structural problem. And I also think we need to get a better sense of how these changes have worked out for the district. I don't have a lot of comparison points yet, but I was alarmed to see, and Dr. Pearson-Campbell made mention of this in her presentation, that by a lot of the state standards, we're not actually doing particularly well in special education. And we're spending a lot more money than we used to. And we're having higher than average IEP rates, higher than average 504 rates. We're having disproportionality impacts. So as a structural problem, we've built something, and I'm not sure if we know if it's working, and I'm not sure if we've told everybody what it costs to sustain that. And right now, what we're doing is sort of nibbling around the edges to try to balance it. But as Bobby pointed out, this problem continues on into the future. So we really need to spend some time understanding what these drivers are, what's really happened under John's leadership with these additional FTEs and sort of the production of this particular cliff, and then try to find a plan that's really going to benefit our students and the district. I'd suggest the Budget and Property Committee is the best place for this to live, but I would, obviously defer to my colleagues on that. But until we really figure that out, we're going to have to keep making similar cuts in the next year and in the next year, and it's going to impact general education across the district. So, sorry for being long-winded. Thank you.
Josh, did you want to come to the podium and?
So I just wanted to point out, thank you. I just wanted to point out a few important points from the presentation on special ed in particular. So one piece that Dr. Pearson-Campbell had mentioned is a 14% increase in out-of-district costs for the upcoming fiscal year. And I just want to clarify that that is actually completely out of our control. So what she's referencing is that the Operational Services Division has increased out-of-district tuition rates by 14%. So typically, it's anywhere from 3 to 5% is the increase that we see each year. So a few committee members have asked some really great questions, which I spent a good portion of the weekend working on the memo to all of you around some more comprehensive information. And in that, I just want to share a few really important points that I think are important for the whole community to receive as well. So when we look at that 14% rate increase, our least expensive private day school, that's an increase of $7,204.88. And one of our most expensive private day schools, that's an increase of $18,322.55. And that represents one student. And so I just want to provide some context that overall we're seeing an increase of $360,234 in out-of-district tuitions, in part because of the astronomical increase that the OSD has decided the private day schools need due to inflation. And so the problem is that it's sort of compounded by a larger amount of money that the city needs to contribute this year because of a few different factors. So one is that our circuit breaker reimbursement, so we always we get reimbursed the year prior to us spending that money. So I submitted the reimbursement request last year, we received the money this year, and we spend it next year. And because we had a few students who were privately placed who decided to be homeschooled or moved out of the district or for a variety of different reasons, and the flag post keeps moving. So last year it was $47,000 as the foundation amount, 47 to 48. This year it's $49,964, so it's almost $50,000. So our goal post keeps moving, and the costs keep increasing, which makes it really challenging. So that's one piece. Our circuit breaker dropped. And then the other piece that has a significant impact, which Member Stein referenced, is the fact that we were identified as being significantly disproportionate for Hispanic students who have a primary disability of communication. So the impact of that is that we have to reserve 15% of our entitlement grants for addressing that through what's called comprehensive coordinated early intervention services. And so roughly, if I use this year's allocations, and entitlement grants are grants that we get just by applying, they're not competitive. It's about $125,000. So when you take the 360 and minus 125, and then you think about the 14%, the increase in out-of-district costs isn't quite as astronomical as it first appears, and I just think that that's important. I did a little bit more digging today around where we were in FY15 for the number of students who were out of district, and we had 36. And so for the upcoming school year, we're anticipating about 24. And so the number of kids goes down, and the cost overall goes up astronomically. And so I just think that that's some important context. So that was one piece. And then the other piece that I just wanted to clarify is that really the challenge, which we also see in the cherry sheet, is that the funding formula for public schools has not changed significantly over the course of the years. And so what we're seeing is the fact that state and federal funding continue to go down and local contributions continue to rise. And that is a really horrible scenario to be in when we think about the fact that some of the services for our most vulnerable and neediest students are the most expensive. One other piece that I just wanted to clarify, which I know Dr. Pearson-Campo mentioned, but was around the special education restructuring. So one of the ways that I think we can address our increased special education numbers, as well as the difference between the percentage of students in the state for special education, which is around 18 to 19%, and the districts, which is in the mid-20s, is by putting more resources back into our school buildings. And so the short version of the restructuring is that I'm recommending that one of our Unit B administrators from my office, so it's currently myself and 2 associates, is eliminated and repurposed to be 2 elementary special education coordinators, or the equivalent of ETLs, split amongst the 4 schools. So 1 person for 2 schools and a second person for the other 2 schools. And so part of the way that we're funding that, which is why there's a representation of about 54,000, give or take, of savings from restructuring, is using a chunk of the $125,000 that we have to reserve for early intervention services to help address some of those root causes. And so I'll share more information about sort of all of those things, and I did provide sort of more detail in the overarching presentation, but I really sort of wanted to draw those pieces to your attention. And then the last piece that I'll add is that, so it's in my budget profile, it's in our budget profile, it's not in my budget presentation, is that we are getting ready to go through the second round of tiered focus monitoring in the fall and spring of next year. And so that particular and this ties to sort of the examination of our special education programs, because as part of that, we have to outline a schedule of self-assessment and evaluation for all of our programming for special ed. And so that will be sort of ongoing over the course of the next year. So to Member Stein's point around looking at sort of the effectiveness or ways that we may need to change the way that we do things, I think that that will be sort of a good stepping off point. So we do our self-assessment this spring, and then the site visit by the state is next year. Sometimes it's in the winter, sometimes it's in the spring. It just depends on their schedule. And then my hope is to have the remaining answers to your questions, to various members' questions, to you by Wednesday, so that you have it before Thursday's meeting. But if there's any sort of questions or concerns that anyone has that you'd like me to present more specifically on, I'm happy to do that at any point in time.
Thank you so much, Josh. For anyone who doesn't know, Josh Dixon is the Director of Student Services for the Northampton Public Schools. Thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.
Member Seraphy Cox.
Thank you. Last year, when I was talking with then Superintendent Provost and the then business administrator, Nick, don't remember his last name, unfortunately. I was talking with them about this kind of Chapter 70 conundrum, and they made a statement, and I am sure that I'm not going to get kind of the terminology correct here. This is, I think, primarily a question for Bobby, but this may also not be something that you entirely have an answer to. But the statement that they made was that because Northampton is compared to the other communities in the state, is a higher income community, that the state was basically trying to only increase us a little bit each year in order to bring more parity or something between communities that were perhaps lower income, and so they were putting the resources into other communities. Now, of course, this is a conversation that that happened quite a few months ago, and I was just looking through my notebook and I didn't have any specific notes on it. But as we were talking about the Chapter 70 stuff, it triggered that memory for me, and so I'm wondering if that is something that you're also aware of in terms of why the state is putting such a small amount of Chapter 70 aid into our cherry sheet. I see Member Agnes saying, "Oh yeah." So Member Agnes, feel free to answer that if Bobby or
I'm happy to answer.
Okay, I know you have lots of opinions about the state, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So basically what it is that our enrollments have dropped so much that they're beyond what we would typically get. So what the state does is they put us in what's called hold harmless, meaning they don't underfund us because we've dropped so much on our foundation enrollments, but they keep us in that hold harmless section, which means that we only get the minimum aid of at this point, $30 per student. So that's what that ends up to be. And hopefully that answered that enough for you.
Yeah, those are the words that I couldn't remember. So thank you for jogging my memory on that. So then my actual question is, when does that stop? Like, when do we supposedly get low enough that the state then can start increasing us again?
When our enrollment numbers increase. So it's all about the enrollment numbers. Or when the state changes, then
Right, unless there's a change in the formula. And additionally, we're a minimum aid community. We're also a community that has a lot of charter schools around us. So in addition to being minimum aid, we have significant charter sending pressures as well.
And the enrollment numbers that you're talking about, Bobby, are enrollment in NPS itself. So if students are homeschooled or going to private schools or going to charter schools or what have you, then those numbers don't count in our numbers.
I will verify that for you, but I believe it's students who you're financially responsible for.
Because we're financially responsible for students who are in charter schools.
Right.
But not private.
Yeah, not private, correct.
But
Yeah.
not private, I
Okay.
forget that.
And then I have a question about the hiring freeze that happened last year. I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about how the hiring freeze and the the positions that weren't filled because of the hiring freeze has played into this year's budget. And specifically, I'm wondering, were there any schools that saw a disproportionate amount of effect from the hiring freeze, or were all schools in a position where they weren't able to hire positions? I mean, I understand that they were all in the hiring freeze, but if you didn't need to do any hiring, that it didn't affect you. That's the part of that question.
I am not aware that there was a hiring freeze in FY22, because you did say last year. We did institute a hiring freeze this year, just recently, and that's due to the fact that if we're going to have budget cuts, we don't want to hire somebody who we're going to have to then lay off and pay unemployment, and have them, have health benefits that they're then not going to get. So that's the reason basically for the hiring freeze that we did this year. Last year, I'm not aware of, so I would have to look into that. So, and again, I don't think it's disproportionate for this year. We are allowing anything that needs to be done, but if it is something that would probably be a benefited position and are unknown for next year, it just makes fiscal sense to not hire if at all possible, to save those unemployment costs, to save that person from getting insurance and then losing insurance, etc.
Yeah, thank you. I think when I said last year, I did mean this year, since we're talking about FY23 is what I meant. So I think the question that I received from members of the school community was about, well, since at our school we didn't have this position filled, can that count toward our cut? And I'm wondering if you can talk about that.
There is one thing I think I saw that I would have to speak with the building principal about, but that, to my knowledge and to my notes that I have that were left with me, is due to some funding that was gone for Title I.
Bobby,
I don't know.
Josh is stepping up.
Hi.
Mike.
Sorry, me again. So I think the hiring freeze that member Sarah Fee Cox is referencing took place right before Dr. Provost's departure, which was in result to increased potential increases in special education costs, which sort of, well, the best way to look at it is that some of the reductions that occurred at some of our school buildings were repurposed for students who attend those schools but are no longer enrolled in those schools. And so the special education costs were directly related to some of the positions that were not filled. And because it's not a large number of students, it sort of is hard to talk in depth about them. But then the hiring freeze was lifted shortly thereafter when Susan Wright was here as both interim business administrator and superintendent during that period of time, and things have sort of shaken out a little bit, but that would have all been contained in the memo from way back in the beginning of the school year from Dr. Provost with the recommended sort of positions that were frozen. And then many of those were unfrozen. I don't recall the specific details, but I do know that's sort of the gist.
That is true. That did happen, but perhaps I'm conflating something that I came to understand. Sorry, perhaps I'm conflating the two hiring freezes. But yeah, I mean, both of those things are at play for sure. Thank you.
You also, okay, Member Agna.
I'll look at my list now. I think to answer that question that you might have gotten from the constituency that you heard from also happened to have been Jackson Street. There was a tiered support specialist who didn't get filled and the money kind of went away. And I think Josh Dixon explained that the money went away. But I know that that is something that continues to be of concern because of the fact that each school has 2 tiered support or the equivalent of 2 tiered support except for Jackson Street. And so I'm just putting it out there. And maybe Josh can speak to that because I know it's come up and it comes up from, I'm an at-large person and I'm not a Jackson Street person, but I just have heard that.
Sure. So of the elementary schools, Bridge Street has 2 tiered support specialists, and Leeds has 2 tiered support specialists. Ryan Road and Jackson Street have 1 each. And so there was some sort of shifting around of personnel in general at Jackson Street, which was related to some special education positions moving into general ed. And then the hope was that those funds could be utilized to support additional support staff, such as a second tiered support specialist. But those funds were repurposed to support students whose home school is Jackson Street School, who needed additional support in different ways. And so while it feels like a loss to the whole community, it was used for the purpose of supporting students in the community, if that makes sense. That's probably about as much information as I can share, but that's sort of the gist. And so it feels like sort of that money was taken away, but it was really sort of repurposed.
Thank you. I have a couple of things. The issue of performance of students and the need for IEPs and concerns about progress. I know that Roxanne Dory has spoken about this in terms of the new curriculum that the district is undertaking, both in math and ELA. And so even though that's not going to be an immediate fix, it is part of the addressing the issues of progress and the fact that there's been some difficulty in both acquiring math skills and reading. So I think that is a good sign that we're embarking on that. I just want to echo the structural problems, as Bobby called them and Josh called them, and the funding formula that I think John Provost was talking to you about, Emily, that is a kind of a broken record for me. Those of you in the audience know that this is my thing, that I was in the district in 1993 when ed reform came in, and it came in to rectify the things, this, as you expressed, Emily, Member Seraphy Cox, excuse me, that John Provost talked about, that there was a time when it was inequitable and there was a concern about the foundation budgets of certain communities that couldn't provide for their students. So this was an attempt to rectify that. The problem for us is that we're a city and we're part of that. We were part of the Ed Reform Act that required the state to provide more funding for certain districts. And they rank ordered all the cities, and we're number 136 in the state. There are 136 cities in the state, and we still are at number 136. It's a law, it can't be changed except by the legislature, but it is the reason why we have had such difficulty since 1993 in having money that we have consider sufficient. Our foundation budget was great then, but clearly with the costs going up, it's not as great as it was, but there's nothing to do about it, except some of you, and I forwarded it to all the alt team and everybody, that Senator Jo Comerford is having a hearing, or she's not, but the Joint Committee on Ways and Means is holding an FY24 budget hearing on education funding on Friday, or no, the 13th, Monday the 13th, at 11 a.m. And she's asking for input on higher education, childcare, and the fair share. So I actually did the form she's asked people to fill out, and it's about education funding, even if it isn't exactly the line that she said, because education and local aid were really critical pieces, I think, in the problems that we've had over the years. So I would recommend everybody just bombarding her with the concerns that we have in Northampton. And as I said in my letter to her, is that I understand that nobody's going to want to switch places with us and become 136. But I also think that it's time for the legislature to look at this. It's been since 1993, and however many years that is. It's outdated now, and I'm hoping that the legislature would consider changing it. So if you've, well, I guess it's the, you can write to Elena Cohen, elena.cohen@masssenate, MASENATE.gov. If anybody wants me to forward this to them, they can email me and I will forward it. Just, I think if we could bombard this hearing from Northampton, we are in a very difficult position, and it really is time to reconsider this Ed Reform Act and the legislature that has prevented us from realizing what we should as a district. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Member Agna. I will be submitting testimony, and I'll just add that, so we waited, I think it was 25 years for additional ed reform, and it happened with the Student Opportunity Act, but what we saw was that it actually had no positive impact for Northampton.
No
so
legs for us.
Right. And so, I feel like I've said this many times, but I will 100% take the opportunity to say this again. I'm deeply, deeply worried that that's going to be the same situation with the Fair Share Amendment. And so everyone needs to fight to be heard, because, again, it took 25 years for there to be any ed reform. We now have this additional money that's supposed to be directed towards education, and we can't let Northampton be left in the cold again. We have to fight to make sure that we get some of what is desperately needed here in this district. Thank you for letting me piggyback on that. Member Levy.
Thanks. I really appreciate Member Agna and Mayor Chiara, both of your saying what you're saying. So I will not repeat that. I do want to reiterate, though, to the folks who are listening that sending your messages to Senator Comerford would be really, really helpful. I also, though, want to name that I'm feeling a frustration, because when I ran for school committee, I was equally fed up with Chapter 70 funding and the state of our budgets and the lack of state funding. And it's almost like every year we continue to be surprised that we're not getting funded by the state. And at some point, we've got to be able to plan accordingly and to say, hey, it's not fair that we're not getting the funding that we need from the state, And also, we know that we're not getting the funding we need from the state, and we've still got to have really strong schools, and we've still got to figure out a way to get our funding where it needs to be. I am not saying this because I have a solution, and I don't typically like it when folks say, here are all the issues, and I'm not going to offer a solution. But I do want us as a city to be able to plan accordingly. I think it was Member Stein who had mentioned, how do we create a revolving education fund or something that allows us to be able to plan for the shortfalls that we know are coming every year. So that's one thing that maybe that is budget and property. But I think we as a city need to be able to do that. I want to turn back to the budget presentation because one of the things that I really need is to be able to look at numbers side by side and to be able to look at when this school says they're cutting this position, what does that mean in terms of parity and how they compare to other schools? If one school says we'd only have this many, it's for me, I need to be able to see what are the services that each school provides, what are the numbers that they're providing those services for, and what are the dollars all side by side. And that means I need our budget book. And in that budget book, I need it to be able to really clearly lay out what are we spending money on, what are we cutting. And so my first question is, when can we expect to receive those numbers?
So my answer to that is I'm working really hard and I'm very close. I expect maybe by Wednesday I can have that. That will be based on what we have for numbers right now, the 37, not showing the cuts. So that's what I'm building everything on, and by Wednesday I'm hoping you'll have that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to, I don't want to rush through it. I just want to make sure that what I'm providing for numbers are accurate to the best that, you know what I mean? So
thank you. I appreciate that. I don't want you to rush through it either. I think for me to be able to ask informed questions, it's hard to do that. And I worry that this is my opportunity to ask questions, and it's hard to do that without being able to see those numbers. So I hope that we will have another opportunity to ask questions once we've got those numbers in front of us. The other thing that I really want to say here is that I'm really troubled by class sizes and by the increase in class sizes. I don't like seeing kindergartens of 20. I don't like seeing elementary classes of 25. I don't like that we already have some high school classes at 30, and we're projecting that they're getting even bigger. And while I know we are in a position right now as a district of having to make hard choices, I would love to be able to look at those numbers and see if there's a way to prioritize our choices so that they don't impact the size of our classes. Perhaps that's impossible, but it's a question that I have as we look at what the different scenarios are. So I wanted to make that piece known.
Okay, thank you, Member Levy. Member Robbins.
Thank you. And I also want to extend a huge thank you to my colleagues who have been so coherent and thoughtful about the situation that's in front of us and working towards rethinking about how we structure and fund our schools in the face of, we talk about meeting with Joe Comerford. I know there are several of us here who remember meeting with Sonia Chang Diaz. Do you remember that at the high school? I can't remember how many years ago, who wanted to talk to us about Chapter 70 funding. And we all thought that we were hitting a high water mark and there would be something that happened. But the legislature has not been friendly to us. And I totally agree that we should be pushing back really hard on our allocation from the fair share monies. We were the second largest positive vote town in Massachusetts for fair share. People here really supported it. They helped pass it, and I'm really hoping that the legislature understands that is how the taxpayers in our city want to see that money spent. So being able to express that and bring it home. I'm going to go back to the budget as well, though, because I have the same concerns about class sizes. I think it's incredibly difficult for children to learn in a large class. It's incredibly difficult to ask teachers to differentiate that number of kids. And when it seems as though our overarching challenge is that we're not providing the services that kids need, I'm appalled that we have 25% of the kids in our district on IEPs. And I don't know how many we have on 504s. I don't think that number includes them. But caretakers want their kids on IEPs because they feel like they're not getting the services that they need. And it feels as though we're not having that larger discussion about how we meet those needs and those expectations in what would be smaller classes where kids are getting those specialized services. And I know in some districts that's been special education teachers becoming co-teachers in classrooms rather than just attending to the needs of a few children one-on-one. I'm very concerned that we've upped the number of one-on-one paras this year. I don't know how many IEPs have required that, but I feel like that is something it's hard to back away from. I don't know how it feels to be a child who has that situation where it's a one-on-one, but I know kids really do want to be part of a classroom where they're getting that service and that attention, and they get lost in a larger group as far as that goes. And then finally, that we do know that we are not meeting the needs of kids if we're having to increase the number of children who require special services, but we're not talking about what the overarching reason for that is, which is our job, and that's to provide an intensive and a really comprehensive and excellent education to all our children. So some of the things that are hanging in the balance here, as Member Agnes said, are being able to provide a comprehensive literacy program, for example, as we did the math program, which has yielded a really good exchange or changes immediately almost upon implementation, upon thoughtful implementation. If we want our kids to be able to have foundation skills and we're not willing to fund them from early childhood on, I'm not at all surprised that children hit the wall and they're not learning, or they back off from learning, or it's a challenge to engage them. And I hope that we can have some kind of a larger discussion as a group, perhaps with the community, about how we can step back and really look at those larger questions about what makes excellent schools, what makes schools a place kids want to be, and that we know some of the fundamental parts of that are smaller class sizes and engaged learning, and whether or not that could be one of the differentials in reducing this extraordinary amount of money that goes to providing special services to an extraordinary number of children. I'm really concerned about it, and I think it's something that we keep brushing aside from year to year, and we never really look at directly. We just say, here are the numbers, and this is what we need to find the money to fund, and it's largely an unfunded mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh, did you want to respond?
Didn't anticipate talking this much today. Just to be clear, I just want to say, Member Robbins, that I think you mentioned something that actually is really, really important for the whole community to hear, and that is that our Tier 1 curriculum in literacy is not addressing all of our students. And I think that that is in part, and we've had this conversation historically for a number of years, that is in part why our special education numbers are so high. Certainly not the only reason, but it is definitely one of them. And I think that having switched to a high-quality instructional curriculum for math, we've seen really positive results early on that has really shown a difference. And my hope is that we will be able to do the same thing with literacy, and we won't see sort of turnaround within necessarily 1 year or 2 years. But I think it's important, to your point, that we make sure that sort of the foundation that all of our kids are accessing, because all of our special ed kids are also general ed kids, gives them the best foot forward so that we can prevent them from having to develop as a student who has special education services, if we can avoid that at any cost. Certainly, many of our students do require special education services, and I don't sort of want to underscore that or understate that, I guess I would say, but I do think that we have a lot of borderline kiddos who are being found eligible for special education services because the faculty and staff who have the best intentions at heart really do feel like that may be the only game in town. And I think that that is a disservice to our students and to our larger community. And, you know, I do appreciate sort of taking an in-depth look. It's hard to believe, actually, I was thinking about it today, that I haven't even been here a year yet. And so I feel like I've done sort of lots of talking over the course of this evening and in the past, but I do think that that's one of the number one things that we can do, both from an equity lens and giving everyone the ability to read before they get to upper elementary school or middle school can be one of the most important things that we can be proud of. So I thank you for bringing that up. And I know that Director Dory and our vertical math and literacy team have been working tremendously on selecting our new benchmarking and our new curriculum. And I hope that we can find the ability in this really challenging budget time to find the money to fund that. Should we need to find local funding to fund that, so that we can put our best foot forward moving forward, because otherwise we're not going to see the changes that we need to in order to keep those numbers, decrease those numbers. So that was all I wanted to say. Well, actually, that's not true. And to the point about one-on-one paraeducators, I will tell you that sort of it's a misnomer that IEPs get approved by me. They actually don't. I realize that they all have my signature on them, and they had Dr. Plummer's signature on them as well. But by the time I see them in many cases, it's sort of too late. I can't unilaterally make any adjustments or changes. And that is in part why I think the restructuring is so important, because we need to have individuals in each of our buildings who can have some of those challenging conversations and talk about, you know, here's what we could try first before we move to having a one-to-one, and see if it works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's a hard position to put our faculty in when they're also the ones who are providing the services to students. And right now, at least at the elementary level, our special education teachers do serve that role of allocating district resources, and I think that that can be a tricky position for our faculty to be in many instances. So hopefully, sort of when you put all of those factors together, we can see a decrease in our overall special education numbers and sort of go back to a more typical percentage, which we've seen in the past. And hopefully the remnants of the pandemic will sort of wear off as we sort of get a little bit more back to normal, because it's really literacy and social emotional needs. Those are the two big areas that we see the biggest amount of struggle. And so if we can address literacy at the very least, that will help decrease that area of challenge.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, let's see, we have not heard yet from Member Miller.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I just think, especially since this is a public meeting, that it's important for all of us to, I'm sure that I speak for all of us, that we're all dismayed by the class sizes and that they really do interfere with learning. So, of course, we need to try to do everything we can to bring those class sizes down, especially the 3rd grade at Jackson Street, 5th grade at Lee's, and the high school classes are abominable. So the sizes. So I also want to encourage the public as well to contact our representatives and senators in the state, so that Senator Comerford and Representative Sabadosa, to advocate for Northampton in the budget, because it is unfair that Northampton is suffering. That's all.
Thank you. Member Davis, we haven't heard from you yet.
Can you hear me? Am I on here? Okay.
Yes.
Very briefly, I was wondering if somebody, I mean, I know, but I don't know if I can say it was Northampton lingo. The term Tier 1, Tier 2 is new-ish lingo that maybe not all the public knows. I mean, the way I understand it is like Tier 1 is regular ed class, yes? Generally. So I just wanted to put that out there for anyone listening of like, what does all that mean? And regarding the IEP numbers, I think that effort to make that shift to reducing the IEPs, the one-on-one support is tied into reducing the class size. Because if those teams of teachers and educators determine that a child requires an IEP for some special support, and then to say, no, actually, they don't, then that child in a class that's too big is going to be very difficult for that child, because there was something that was needing some extra help. And so, so I'm yet again another echo of the absolute importance of a smaller class size. Thank you.
Thank you, Member David. Okay, anyone else who hasn't spoken yet who would like to weigh in before I go around to second rounds? Okay. Member Stein.
I really want to emphasize and reiterate what Member Agnes shared and what Director Dixon just shared and what Member Robin shared, which is we really need to invest in a new literacy curriculum. And I've been really impressed by the work that the vertical reading team has done in finding us a new screener and really identifying what the next curriculum should be. It will be a science of learning curriculum, one that's based on actual evidence. It will move us away from whole language learning. It'll make a big difference. A grant has already been put in. Unfortunately, unlike the math, the state will not fully fund the curriculum, but they will fund, I think, like 160,000 of it. But the budget we're talking about tonight does not have the remaining money in it to buy this curriculum. We need to find another 150,000 or so based on the estimates in order to get the curriculum. And while it sounds like a lot of money, the cost of what we're spending right now and the long-term impact, we can't wait another year. These just all accumulate. Like, we need to find that money because we'll lose the 160,000, right? Then we'll have to pay full freight whenever we do it. Like, we need to find that money. We need to make the investment, and we need to begin rolling this out in order to give all the students the best shot they can to acquire reading skills at an early age. It'll help reduce a lot of things for us and really help students a lot. And I'm really passionate about making that happen and not letting another year go by. I think it's a penny wise and a pound short here for us to do that. The other thing I wanted to mention was I've tried many times to understand this Chapter 70 formulas. At the MASC training I went through, I asked the trainer there, I had the same idea, like, oh, is there a different way that cities are treated? And they were like, no. And then I went through all the spreadsheets and I tried to figure out, like, how is Northampton ranked? And I can't quite figure it out. The best I can do based on what they describe in their actual Excel sheets, which you can all download and look at by district, they will define, their municipal revenue growth factors and their combined effort yields and their equalized valuations. And they will tell you all these things, and then it will spit out some sort of figure. And it seems to me, and I wonder if Bobby can help us understand this better, that we are a fairly wealthy community in terms of property values and our realization of 2.5% increases. So we get the minimum dollar value. And I don't know that it's more complicated than that. I could be wrong, but what they show here, I don't see how else we're structurally disadvantaged. So I'm wondering if Bobby can tell us about that. And then I'm also wondering her thoughts on like the dollars spent per enrolled student as a metric, because that's another comparison that some people like, some people hate. You know, I look at some of the comparison districts, and you know, these are also bad because the scale has to be similar in order for these to be meaningful. But if you look at Northampton, we're at about 17,616 and 27 cents per student. Amherst is at 26,345.29. Chicopee's a little less than us at a little over 17,000. Agawam's 19,684. Holyoke's 18,731. Greenfield's 18,918. East Long Meadows 18,000. So when I look at those figures, we're at towards the bottom. But again, like what's meaningful here? So I'm hoping Bobby can maybe explain a little bit more about Chapter 70 and really like get us into the details of that calculation. And also, is this number of per pupil cost that the state puts out meaningful in any way?
I can add just a little bit. I could do it probably more detailed later. But yes, it is. It's your property value and the wealth of the city. The formulas are so, as I know we met and I pointed you to that direction. They're really interesting, the direction that they go in. I don't have a lot to say right now because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can certainly probably try to give kind of a synopsis of how they do it. But as you've seen, the formula comes out and it's based on, it's everybody talks about how difficult that formula is. So I could do that for our next meeting and have a little more information for that.
That would be great. And do you have any sense if this per pupil cost is a good thing to look at, or is it, what's your take on that as a benchmark?
I'm kind of torn on that because what they take into consideration for the per pupil, again, that's a huge formula that they use, and it's, you know, so much depends on what we have our data person putting in, and what they're taking for that data and when they're taking that data at the state. So it's just huge. But I'm kind of torn on that per pupil expenditure piece about what it really means. Because I'm not sure that it really means what it's saying it means, to be honest. But I can give you more for the next time on that.
Yeah, that would be great. Because, you know, I was trying to figure out how much per pupil these cuts are. Yeah. And, you know, it's 400 some odd dollars. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, if we're talking about 400 some odd dollars and we add it into what we're spending, that would bring us up sort of equal to East Long Meadow and about 731 under Holyoke, right? But again, like, is that meaning, like, it's obvious to me when you look at smaller districts that have half the enrollment, that the scale of the calculation is so off as to not really be helpful in understanding, right, the cost. So yeah, if you have more thoughts on it, I'm just trying to understand where we stack up and what the best metrics are to understand Northampton's investment in its public schools vis-a-vis other communities that we use for these other benchmarks. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Okay, I'll put something together.
Member Seraphy Cox.
Thank you. And one thing that I wanted to highlight about the information that was released in conjunction with the Senator Comerford's, I know it's not her, it's her committee's hearing, they released some information about how the Fair Share Amendment funds were being utilized. And from the breakdown that I saw, K through 12 education was only getting $10 million. That there was a huge chunk going to childcare and early education. So CPPI is getting a big investment, which obviously is good for our preschool program and our hopes to expand it. Well, potentially good. And then there was a lot of higher ed investment, but the K through 12 funds, it was $10 million to go toward career pathways programs. So that kind of speaks, for me, that speaks to a bit of the challenge, or I wonder how that's connected to our challenge here as well. So when we're talking about advocacy, to the state around the Fair Share Amendment, that piece strikes me as important. So thank you in advance to anybody who also fills out that questionnaire, because I found it to be a really useful way to give the input. And then just a very quick logistical thing for the presentations. A question about the enrollment numbers that are in the budget presentation. Okay, see, now my app closed because I was off it for a while. On what slide is this? The budget recognitions slide. This is on the SC NPS FY24 presentation. On the budget recognition slide, the FY23 enrollment is put at 2676, but on the what is this, the 7th or 8th slide, the overview of Northampton school enrollment, the FY23 enrollment is at 2573. So those two numbers are about 100 students, different from each other. So just wanting to know which one of them is correct, and how that might influence, anything else in the budget.
We can look.
And obviously, you don't need to answer that specifically now because you may need to look into the numbers.
Yeah, we've had to look at the Department of Ed. That's where we retrieved our numbers from DESE to see if there's anything changed since we did the presentation, but we can look on the Department of Ed website.
Interesting information.
Okay, Member Agna.
I was just going to follow up on Member Robbins' comment about the hearings with Sonia Chang Diaz. I do remember them very well, and I don't think that what you're suggesting is that it's kind of pointless. I was a little bit concerned because I want the public to think that, yes, we can, and as our President Obama would say, that we really do need to advocate, and I appreciate Member Seraphy Cox saying that too, that this is such a critical time, and I know that Member Levy says we shouldn't be going down this path over and over again when we know what it is at the end, but I have to believe that we have some receptive audience at the state level, and I really encourage the public to fill out the form or actually tune in to the hearing, which is on Monday the 13th at 11 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Agna. Okay, I don't, excuse me. Anyone else who hasn't spoken who would like to speak? Member Stein?
Yeah, it's just sort of following up on those points, which is, I would feel really good if we could find a way to describe exactly the change we want, either in Chapter 70 or in State Aid. If there's a way for us to say like what we're looking for, I think that could be helpful to our legislators to know actually the change we seek. And to me, it's so opaque that I can't quite figure out what we want them to change. I mean, I think they're doing year over year an extra 500 million in Chapter 70, and we're going to get, 80,000. So like specifically, like what is the position that we're advocating that we deserve, and how should it be made, et cetera. And I don't know what that call is. But I'd be interested in thoughts that folks have that probably maybe know more about this formula and more about this. What is the legislative fix here to our problem? Because I'd love to help advocate for it as well. At the same time, I think, like many of you, dismayed by the way in which some of the early discussions about the additional tax money we, helped get passed is going to be allocated. And I was really dismayed about the recent, extension of the estate tax credits up to 3 million. It seemed like an ominous sign about what's to come from our new leadership, even when it's paired with some other tax benefits on lower income brackets. But it doesn't seem to me, based on what we're seeing at this point, that aside from some increases in reimbursement rates, we're really going to get a whole lot. Just reading the tea leaves, it sounds much more like the sort of race to the bottom philosophy of how do we make the state attractive to high earners in order to keep jobs or build jobs or whatever. That was sort of the way that's been sold. So I think we need to push hard, and we need to know specifically what we need. I would just put that out there. If anyone has ideas, please let me know specifically what we want and what would make a difference for Northampton.
Thank you for that, Member Stein. Anybody else? I don't see any other hands. If there's no further discussion, this is the last item on the agenda. Well, you all know what the next step is if there's no further discussion. Member Gazy.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion's been made by Member Gazy.
Second.
Seconded by Member Davis. Roll call, please, Annie, when you have.
Member Robbins?
Yes.
Member Gazy?
Yes.
Member Seraphy-Cobb?
Yes.
Member Stein?
Yes.
Member Levy? Yes. Member Miller?
Yes.
Member Goldman?
Yes.
Member Agna?
Yes.
Member Davis?
Yes.
And Mayor Shara?
Yes. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much. There is a meeting on Thursday at 6:30. Not here, back in the community room at JFK for those that will be in person, or on Zoom for those who will be remote. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.